getting back to where we were at, when the county, we have a recordation, that brings the state, i.e. the political subdivision, the county, the corporation, into our business, because at that point they're holding commercial paper in trust for us, okay? That gives them an interest right off the top. And it's been my experience, and I've been told and told and told, and I have to believe that that recordation gives the county a nexus to hold, and they're holding that in that paper, commercial paper in trust for us, gives them an interest in our property, which gives them the right to tax it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have an interest in that property, and without an interest in that property, the county, being a corporation, okay, would be bound to the same rules as any other corporation, and they would have to demonstrate that there was a commercial agreement or contractual arrangement or a nexus of some nature between us and them, giving them an interest in their property before they could tax it.
It's becoming apparent to a lot of people now that counties and states are in fact corporations.
They're not only corporations, Bruce, they are listed with Dun & Bradstreet and with other rating agencies. The one I use is, because it's least expensive, it's called MANTA, MANTA.com, and it's a rating agency that gets their information from Dun & Bradstreet, and they specify that Apache County, where I live, is a private company incorporated in the state of Arizona, and that the treasurer in this instance is not listed as the treasurer, but listed as a manager, a branch manager of the Treasury Department, which is a branch of a private company. And this is in black and white. And so what I'm saying is that they're operating in a governmental capacity, but as a corporation, and so they have to follow the same rules that any other corporation would have to follow in terms of having some type of a contractual arrangement with us in order to enforce their codes, rules, and regulations and corporate statutes. When they want us to perform, or they're sending us a bill, or they're involving in any way, shape, or form, they're involving Federal Reserve notes or a check, which is considered as security. Federal Reserve notes are commercial paper, all right? They belong to the Federal Reserve, which is a private banking institution, which makes that commercial paper. When that county deals in commercial paper in its capacity as a corporation, it must place into evidence, prior to enforcing any of its corporate statutes, codes, rules, or regulations, it must place into evidence in a court a contractual or commercial agreement that you signed under full disclosure. That is the Clearfield Doctrine, a Supreme Court decision from 1942. And it is as good today as the day it was written.
And so, for them to present that, it's impossible.
That's correct.
Because I've never done that. I don't know if anybody else ever has.
That's correct.
So when we receive our property tax statement in October or November, what is that then?
In my opinion, based on the federal statutes, and I'm not into statutory law, but based on federal law, federal statutes that are also found on the Code of Federal Regulations in most cases, binding them, making them a law, it is classified because the treasurer doesn't sign it, it's not verified, it has no significance in terms of a statute or a law that is even mentioned in it, and it comes not as a tax bill, it comes as a tax notice. All right, and being a tax notice, and not being verified as to its validity and not being signed in wet ink, in my opinion, is a counterfeit security. Okay, and that's based on what I've learned from the federal statutes. It's a counterfeit security, and when the treasurer, having only that to show indebtedness, if you don't pay the alleged notice of tax and you don't pay that, and she determines that she's going to sell that, and she sells that, which according to statute she can do, but when she sells it, it's my opinion that she's committing securities fraud. Now, those are only opinions, and like a lot of other things, everybody's got one. But the bottom line is, we need to question not only the validity of that notice, because it doesn't say this is a tax bill. It doesn't specify that this is a bill under Title 42 or under the Arizona Constitution. You go to the Arizona Constitution and it talks about an ad valorem tax, added value tax. It talks about widows exemptions. It talks about all kinds of things. And then it says very politely at the very end, at the last paragraph, shall be implemented by legislation. I can't find the legislation that specifies that the treasurer has the right to bill me for anything. And in that legislation, Bruce, for it to be lawful, it must have an enacting clause in the first paragraph, which I can't find, that specifies that that treasurer can bill me for anything, period.
I see. Let's talk about the Forest Service for a minute. We doing okay? I've been after these RS 2477 roads for 10 years, primarily after the fire. And now we know that, by their own words, that they intend to close 30% of the roads in the forest. Our argument is that they don't have the right to do that, number one, if we claim those roads. And two, it's not beneficial to the land because it would be detrimental to fire suppression, game retrieval, recreation, this, that, and the other. What's your view on that?
Well, I think that at the present time, you're looking at a situation that if it is not approached from a constitutional perspective in regards to the state having the obligation to protect the health, welfare, and safety of their citizens, if that's not the approach taken in trying to deal with the Forest Service, I don't see you getting very far. Now in New Mexico, a few other places, I know that they have used that portion of their Constitution which gives them not only the authority, but gives them the obligation to be responsible for the health, welfare, and safety of their citizens. That's painted with a broad brush, and I think can have some influence on the Forest Service. But I got to be honest with you, and this, you can print it or not print it. The Forest Service today is made up of what's left of the radical environmentalists from the 1960s. Most of them are dying off, okay? But for the most part, these radical environmentalists, not using sound science, strictly using emotion, in attempting to protect the environment, have in fact, and were in fact, the first homegrown terrorist that there is, and that there was, okay? Right. And a lot of the supervisors, now leaving the Forest Service, came out of the 60s, and they were these radical environmentalists that used not sound science, but emotions to cripple the multiple use issue. When it came to the National Forest, originally it was to be managed for multiple use. Along came these environmentalists, and they didn't talk about conservation, about conserving on a waste not, want not theory. They talked about total abstention and turning it back to a pristine condition as it was 1700 years ago. Once man has touched that ground, you're not going to turn it back to a pristine condition. You then have to manage it, but you have to manage it using common sense and sound science. They didn't do that. And in my opinion, the first terrorists were environmentalists and still are today. They should be restricted to arbitration, not litigation. They should be restricted by law and by presidential executive order, that they can arbitrate and bring to the table sound science to assist in the management of the forest and other public lands, but they couldn't hold up progress in drilling and timber and mining and cattle and break the back of the American people economically with using emotions versus sound science.
Well, looking at their mandate when they first were formed, what, 1940?
Actually, they were formed. It was 1924, I believe.
Okay. Their original mandate has been lost in the paperwork over these years.
Gone.
And so we've been advocating the state take the land back and put it back into production. Timber, cattle grazing, repair the waterways, get them cleaned up for water conservation, this, that, and the other.
Well,
what's your view there?
I think your dream is possible, and I'll tell you why. I think the states at some point in the very near future will have to take back the federal lands because the federal government, praise God, is broke. And as long as they're broke because they've spent themselves into oblivion, they're not in a position to sit up there and dictate what's going to happen in reference to public lands. They're going to go back to the states where they belonged in the first place under the equal footing doctrine. And as they had on the East Coast, we shall have on the West Coast, and that'll be that the states and the individual communities will make determinations on the management of what we classify now as public lands.
Right. Well, Dink, I think that pretty well covers it for our first one. And I appreciate your time and hope we can do this again. And we'll call it a day.
All right.